Nu är ni välkomna till Se människan-scenen här hos Svenska kyrkan på Bokmässan. Nu ska vi lyssna till Val McDermid som är deckarförfattare. Samtalet tillsammans med Sara Wrige, teolog och doktor i fysik, om Vals bok Det svarta nätet. And this conversation will be held in English since Val is a native English speaker. You're very welcome.
Thank you so much. So let me also say welcome, Val. It's very nice to have you here and to talk about this, your latest book that's called in English, Splinter the Silence.
Yeah.
And I must confess I kind of struggle with the title, what it means. What does the title mean?
Well, titles don't always map directly onto subject matter of books. Sometimes they're a bit more oblique. And I guess that this kind of came from the idea that for a long, long time, women in particular are silent about the abuse that's visited on them. They keep quiet, they just put up with things. And the idea that this book is women who are not prepared to shut up, if you like, who are breaking that silence, who are breaking it into fragments, they're splintering the silence.
So could you just, for those who still haven't read the book, and probably will, we hope, what is the story, the starting point?
Well, this is the 9th book I've written that features Tony Hill and Carol Jordan. Tony is a clinical psychologist and Carol is a cop. And in this particular book, they end up investigating a series of what look like suicides, which are officially signed off as suicides, but Tony, who is very good at seeing patterns, starts to wonder about connections between these apparent suicides that lead him to think they might not be suicides after all. And at the heart of the book is online abuse, really.
Because I think that's the most significant theme in your book about the internet, and that it has a very dark side, an evil side to it. Is this a book about solving a puzzle, like a puzzle detective, or is this a book about something going on in society?
Well, it's both of those things. I mean, we know as readers quite early on who the killer is and what his background is and why he's doing what he's doing, but the detectives don't know that. So as the readers, we're in the driving seat in the sense of we can see the detectives going in the wrong direction or the right direction. So there's an element of will they catch the guy, how will they catch him? And there's always, at the end, something that has not up to that point been explained. There's always something at the end in the resolution that comes as a surprise to the reader. And I think that's quite important. But also, the books are about individuals, about character, they're about elements of society. The crime novel is the place, I think, where writers are most clearly addressing social issues, social history these days. That's where you find the way we live now. And people go to it's one of the reasons why people read crime fiction is because it is a snapshot of the way we live now. And it's often also a snapshot of other cultures. You know, if you're going on holiday somewhere, you don't have to read a travel guide, you can read the crime novel that's set there, and you get a picture of how people live and what matters to them in that community. So it's all of those things.
So is that easier done in a crime novel than in another kind of novel?
I think it is, and I think there's the very good reason for that is the crime novel by its nature can encompass the whole breadth of society because you have, if you like, a set group of roles within the book. You've got the victim. So you've got the victim and you've got their friends, their family, their workmates, their community. You've got the witnesses, you've got their friends, family, community. You've got the investigators who have their own very different lives. You've got the media who are covering this. You've got the forensic scientists who are investigating it. So all those different lives you can draw on. So you can, without any difficulty, you could write a crime novel that has the highest in the land and the lowest in the land, all playing a crucial role in it. So you can explore all sorts of interactions and the way all sorts of different worlds collide within the society that we live in.
Is it also true that the puzzle sort of see what happens or who the murderer is or if they will catch him? Does that help the reader? So that sort of, if something gets a little bit boring, you can sort of, okay, I have to go on. Whereas if you read a non-fictional book, you might say, okay, now it's too much, and put it aside.
Well, I don't think any bits of my books are boring.
No.
But I think it's absolutely.
But the non-fictional books might, or not
Yeah,
yours.
I think it's
I haven't read that.
It is absolutely the case that a strong story draws you through.
Yes, that's what I mean.
And if you don't, if you're writing a novel and you don't have a strong narrative arc, then you will lose the reader.
Yes.
So anything else you might want to write about gets just lost because they're not going to carry on reading something that doesn't grab them. I think sometimes if you tell your story really well, it's sometimes a disservice to the writer because the reader is reading you for the story and for what happens next, and they're not actually examining your beautiful prose. But there you go. You know, life's hard.
So how is that, the beautiful prose and being translated? Is that, because of course you cannot read it in Swedish, so you don't know if
I have
it's
to take it on trust.
Yeah.
That translation is always it's a difficult art, and things always get lost in translation. If you have any attempt at all at writing prose that has a rhythm, a balance, a music to it, that inevitably can change with translation.
Yes.
And it's sometimes you have to take it on trust, and it's quite interesting this, because linguistic scientists tell us that Agatha Christie writes very lucid prose. Her prose can be read in English by someone with a reading age of 9 years old. And that's one of the reasons why she's so successful in translation, is because the language is very clear and very simple and very easy to translate, so nothing gets lost in translation. But for most writers who don't have that clarity of style, that simplicity of style, then you lose in translation.
That's interesting. So let's get back to the darker side of life. Do you, as a writer, have a particular interest in that?
Well, I write crime fiction, so by definition, I'm on the dark side of the street because I'm writing about people killing people and people doing terrible things to each other. So yeah, I am interested in the things that we do to each other and why we do them. I think it's impossible to go through the world with an attitude of everything's lovely and people are lovely and let's all be smiley and nice to each other, because that's not the reality. And I'm interested in confronting the difficult realities that we have to live with, that we have to mitigate, that we have to find a way of coexisting with.
And in this book, it's all about the online abuse that also turns into real-life abuse and ultimately murder. Why do people do that, or some people do that?
Because for them it's somehow satisfying. Because I think most violence and most abuse is situational. I don't believe in evil. I don't think some writers talk about people being born evil, and I think that's wrong. I don't think we're born evil or we're born good or whatever. We're defined by what is done to us and how we grow up and the values that are instilled in us as children and that we take forward into our adult lives. People do terrible, terrible things to each other, but that's not because they're evil intrinsically. I believe that we have to take responsibility, even though what we do sometimes is a product of what's been done to us. But to say, somehow people are born evil and that's that lets us all off the hook.
Yeah.
Because if that's the way it is, then why bother trying to change anything?
Exactly, because that has to mean also that if people are not born evil, then also something can be done about it.
Yes, exactly that.
Yeah.
So I think it's, for me, I'm interested in examining the motives of why people behave the way that they do, and what leads us into those places where doing something awful seems to be a reasonable, logical thing. People don't just do things for no reason at all, unless they have some form of mental illness. There is, for them doing these things, there is a motivation. They do it because it satisfies some need in them, or they think it satisfies some need in them, or they can't see any other way to meet a need in them. And I think that a lot of people, particularly men in contemporary society, feel powerless. They feel that they've somehow had what was rightfully theirs taken away from them. Yeah. And I think that's partly because for a lot of men, their working life was about making things, about being able to point to something at the end of the day and say, I made that, or I did that, or I changed that. Yeah. Now, so many jobs are dead-end jobs. There's 0 hours contracts, they're gig economy jobs. And that has stripped people of a lot of their sense of self. and they feel powerless, they feel just a cog in the machine, and often that manifests itself in misogyny. Those women have the jobs I should be doing, or whatever. It's, I mean, I'm sorry, it's quite simplistic to put it in those terms, but I think that something like that is at the root of the kind of problems that manifest themselves in this book.
So is that a question of how we have constructed our gender roles, or?
Yes, it's a question. I mean, I think we did not, society did not provide an alternative expression of masculinity, if you like. And we've failed to do that. And that's to say that's not an excuse, but it's an explanation to some degree, I think. And it is. I don't like to make generalizations, but it is almost always men who engage in this sort of horrible online abuse. And certainly in the UK, the ones who have ended up being prosecuted tend to be the sort of inadequate failures, you'd have to say, kind of men who are still living with their mother in their 30s and have achieved very little in their lives and feel somehow resentment as if that's been a right that has been taken from them, that a sense of entitlement somehow has been wounded.
Do you see any ways of how society could fix this or make it better?
That's not my job. You know, it's hard to say how. I don't know the answers.
Let's talk about.
Yes. But I think, you know, it's something that we all need to look at. It's about the way we bring up children. It's about the values we instill in children, and that's where we have to start. We have to find a way of making children grow up with a sense of self-worth, regardless of their gender, regardless of anything else, that they are as individuals worth something.
And regardless of the sort of material success.
Yes.
Yeah. So let's talk a bit about the women in your book, the women who are murdered. Because they are standing up for different issues and regardless of the abuse that they suffer. What makes them do that?
Because they believe in it. Because they have been raised with a sense of self-worth, I suppose. Because they think that, you know, you don't just lie down and let things happen. I mean, you know, we've seen demonstrations in the street here today of people taking to the street against the Nazis who would shut us up. People taking to the street because of something they believe in. Nobody's making them go out there and take a stand, but people do because they believe that they believe their cause is just. They believe in the right thing, and thank goodness for that.
That is very important. I think isn't it also important to sort of have each other's back in this?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Because I'm thinking you started out talking about the silence about this abuse. And is it also the silence making it a problem that the one who suffered the abuse, they become very lonely?
Yes.
And think that nobody else is in the same situation?
Yeah, I think it's important to not be silent, but it's important to give people a safe space in which they can speak. And, you know, I think one of the reasons why we write is that people can find in books often a safe space. A safe space where they can at least think their own thoughts. And sometimes people feel so oppressed that they can't even think their own thoughts. Yeah. But books are one way that we can find ourselves in the world.
Books are a safe space. Yeah. So what is your relationship with your main characters in this book, Carol, Jordan, and Tony Hill? Are they friends or family or foes or...?
They're just people I make up. I'm in charge, you know. I mean, it's, I don't know. I mean, I when I'm working, I occupy a universe where I'm God. Nothing happens without my say-so. I hear voices in my head and I talk back to them. If I wasn't writing it down, I would probably be having some sort of medical treatment.
Okay.
They're characters that have developed over the years that I have learned more about as I have worked more with them. You know, you start off with a story. I mean, I started off with The Mermaid Singing, not thinking it was going to be a series. That was the first Tony and Carol book. And as the book progressed, I began to see the potential for writing about both those characters and the kind of work that they did. So really book to book, because of the story I kind of create for them to participate in, I have to develop them as individuals so that they can actually carry the story forward. They can make the story work, can make the story happen. And then, of course, every book that I write creates limitations for the next one, because what I've done before can't be undone. So Tony, for example, isn't suddenly going to turn into a sort of action hero, leaping tall buildings.
That would be very surprising.
It would be very surprising. Yes, he's more of an inaction hero. But he does what needs to be done.
That is true. That is true.
But I mean, it's quite interesting because I never write books with the same characters back to back because I get bored very quickly. So whenever I'm writing one of these, it's because I will have had a gap of a year or a couple of years in between the books. And so when I come back to them, there is that sense of freshness, that sense of interest, excitement. Where are we going to go with this book? Where are we going to go today? What happens next in these lives?
Are you a very disciplined writer?
Not very. I mean,
You've written a lot, so you have to have some discipline.
Well, I was a journalist for a long time, so I'm accustomed to treating it as a job. It's what I do. And I write the books every year between January and sort of the middle of April. And in those sort of 3.5 months, I probably work most days, probably write most days, but there's no set. I don't sort of sit down at 9 and stop at 5 or anything like that. It's because there's other things get in the way. And I don't think I've ever written a good sentence before 11 o'clock in the morning. I'm not a morning person. So I start work around about 10:30, 11 o'clock. And I write in 20-minute chunks. That seems to be the concentration span that I have. So I write for 20 minutes, and I go and do something else, maybe look at my Twitter feed, or make a cup of coffee, or put the laundry in, or play a computer game or something. Then I go back and do another 20 minutes, and so the day goes.
Interesting.
And I finish when it stops working.
And then after April until the next year in January, you write nothing, or you write...
Oh, I do other things. I do all sorts of other things. I do obviously tour to promote the book. I mean, after I've finished, we have the process of, the sort of tedious process of editing and copy editing and proofreading, which takes takes another couple of months. But the rest, I mean, I do other projects as well. So at the moment, I'm working on a stage play, a graphic novel, and a major project for Edinburgh in the new year.
But do you get new ideas for novels? So you have like 1,000 post-it notes? Or
no, don't write things down.
You just keep them in here?
Yeah, because if they're not interesting enough to remember, why would anyone want to read about them?
Okay.
I make notes about technical stuff. If I for example, I wrote a book some years ago, Last Temptation, which is mostly set on the waterways of Europe. So I spent like 3 weeks going around talking to barge owners and Rhine ship pilots and all sorts of river people, and I made a lot of notes because I had to know technical things like how big the Rhine ship is and how many containers it can take. So anything technical I'll make notes, but anything that's to do with the shape of the story or the imaginative thrust of the book stays here in my head.
Okay. So your detectives are very popular in Sweden.
Good.
And I think also so do you think there is a connection between the two countries, Britain and the Nordic countries, that makes it easy to sort of culturally translate crime novels?
I think there is a cultural connection between Scotland and the Nordic countries that goes back into the Middle Ages. There was always like a strong connection across the North Sea, particularly between Norway and Scotland. We have a similar, I suppose, with some elements of shared history. We have some elements of commonality now. There's a sense of common political systems, a sense of social democracy. And I think particularly now in Scotland, we have a very strong interest in the Nordic countries to see how small countries can do well economically in the modern world, because that's something we aspire to be doing in the not too distant future, we hope.
Okay.
So those connections are very strong for us. And we have the same long, dark winter nights.
Yeah, that's maybe important for how people are formed.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think this is your 29th novel, am I correct?
Yeah, that'll be the 29th, yeah.
So how do you keep it up? Where do you get your inspiration from?
Everywhere. Ideas are all over the place. Sometimes the hard bit is getting the ideas to shut up. Every day something happens that makes me go, oh, that's interesting, or oh, I didn't know that. Curiosity is what drives my imagination. I'm interested in things. When I hear things that interest me, I'll find out a little bit more about them. And a lot of those those quirky things, those momentary things that catch my attention,
So you're a
just
good
they
observer.
disappear. A lot of them, they just disappear. They're never heard from again. But other ones sort of sit there and take on shape and take on substance as time goes by.
That is very good for us as readers that you're such a good observer and
thank
turn
you.
it into these interesting and fun to read. Is that okay to say?
Yeah, it's okay. It's okay to say.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I want people to enjoy my work. I mean, my goal really is that people enjoy the books, but that also when they close the books, there's still something going on in their head.
Yeah, you keep thinking
'Cause
about
that's
it.
the kind of that's what I like as a reader. I like books that leave room for my imagination or for my own thoughts
Yeah.
when I've closed the book.
So thank you very much, Val, for being here and sharing your knowledge and your writing with us.
It's
Thank
been
you
a pleasure.
so much.
Thank you. Thank you.